Well, as we said, yesterday was Paris Chic, and if you hadn't seen Burkhardt Hall, you can still see vestiges. Probably the Eiffel Tower is still standing, handmade, beautifully done. Cheryl, you said something yesterday that I thought I was thinking about actually after the event. Because it was high fashion, so high fashion, there was a fashion show. In fact, Rio the dog came and was part of the fashion show. And in this world of fashion and celebrity, it was a very fun and Parisian. You said we're in all of this, but we're also celebrating the ladies who are here today and also the spirit of motherhood. And that seems to me so much of what our community of faith is about. Like, we're living in this world and we enjoy living. It's fun to be alive for the most part. But we want to go deeper and we want to find these sort of foundational things that allow us to continue to build for generation to generation and to celebrate those things. And that's part of what our faith journey is about. Now you'll notice the Paschal candles behind the altar that will be put out next Sunday as part of Pentecost, and then we'll move it back by the baptismal font. It is just a reminder during these days of Easter that this pillar of light, it's like the Israelites following the pillar of light. That's why it got moved. Sometimes you might wonder, why are they moving the furniture? There's actually a purpose. We're not just moving it around. But it's meant to communicate something about the seasonal time that we're in. And we're kind of in this strange 10-day period where Jesus ascends and Pentecost has not yet happened for the disciples. Of course, it's happened for us, so we're not necessarily living in that space. But I think there's a window of time that is instructive for how we live. And it is a window of time where Jesus is seeing the Father answer the prayer that he offered that we read in John 17. Now, you've known that story from Acts. The disciples go out to Mount Olivet, and they're watching Jesus disappear, or at least it looks like he's disappearing as he goes into this sort of trans-dimensional communion with the Father, bearing our flesh. And then those two figures, who we might imagine were the same figures from Easter. And if you remember my Easter sermon, because I know you just have all of that as a catalog in your head, we talked about the two angels being the mobile throne of God, and now he's being enthroned in heaven, So they go, why are you looking up there? And they go, well, it's kind of obvious. He just went up, we're following where he is. And it seems in their question, they're really saying, well, is that where he is? Of course, he is at the right hand of the Father, but now he's also sending you to show his presence in the world. This is the commissioning that Jesus gives. You are my witnesses. And I want to connect those two concepts this morning of being a witness and also experiencing God's glory. We heard a lot of that in that prayer Jesus offered in John 17 about glorifying myself. I glorified myself, you glorified yourself, we glorified each other. I took your glory, you took mine. You read that going, what is happening? But what you see a lot of back and forth, the giving and receiving, which is characteristic of the divine life, receiving and reflecting and giving back and so on. And so Jesus commissioned the apostles, but he also commissions you to be a witness and to have that witness connected to the glory. And we'll have to talk about what that means. But we find ourselves in a very vulnerable space because now that Jesus is gone and the disciples are living, it's as if Jesus has now begun the work of commissioning the church to carrying on the task, even though God will be present in the Spirit. Jesus entrusts us with a particular part of the mission, and it will require you to be present to the world in a way that you can't retreat from the world's suffering. You can't retreat from the world as we find it, because to be a true witness of God's glory is to show the light of Easter in a world that's being crucified. This is a very important part of our witness. And there's so many things that we do as modern people that kind of keep us away from suffering, keep us away from hardship. And it's important that we just have ourselves living vulnerably so that in fact, whatever happens, we can be a witness to this hope. So it's not a vulnerability without hope, where you're just sort of feeling beat up and thrown around. You're rooted in a promise, and your vulnerability comes with hope. And that's why I want to tell you about two things that happened this week. I think one you know about, one you probably don't know about, as indications that you're doing this work. Sometimes, I was thinking about this. I've been here 5 years. I've probably preached almost 300 sermons to you if you add up the seasonal stuff. If you watch the devotions, that's been over 500 of the, so like if you're watching all of our stuff, you're like a good 1,000 messages into this. And the whole point is to keep us focused on the gospel. That's the whole point. What is the good news of Jesus? And, to be honest, it's like baseball. If you get 1 out of 4, you're doing pretty well in terms of the preacher. And you go, well, that didn't hit, but well, whatever, we'll come back next week. But the idea is to keep focus, and oftentimes it's asking you to look forward. What is it that God will call you to do? But today we can spend a little bit of time looking at what you have done as something that's spiritually indicative of what it means to be a witness to God's glory. So in the same way that the ascension happened on Thursday, I want to talk about Don dying and a little bit of what we had happen on Monday. Now, if you remember, Don is someone that we were connected to through the police department right before the pandemic, literally as the world was closing. And he was living in his car in Central Park. We took him a Thanksgiving meal the day before Thanksgiving. And it was probably the lowest I've ever seen a person in terms of humiliated. I mean, some people are low, but they're not humiliated because they don't have that sense of pride to be violated. He still had that. And from that moment, he couldn't see, if you remember, and we took him to the hotel on Brookhurst and Slater. In fact, we just put someone else in that hotel, and we know the manager now, so that work is continuing. And that began his life with us. You remember, he came and lived here for a while during the pandemic, and what's been wonderful about that story with Don is during this week, so many of you have come and told us things that you did for him. People that read his mail for him because he couldn't see until he had eye surgery. People that brought him food. People that brought him a television. People that spent time having coffee with him. It wasn't just like a professional church project. It was a church project. It was a church communion. Until finally, he was opening the doors and locking the doors and moving stuff. And he didn't come to work. And then he didn't call. And then Susan and I found his body on Monday at his house. And we were kind of concerned because we really wanted to have his funeral here, and we wanted to be able to have his remains, but he had a sister, and we were never in touch with the sister. It's like she wasn't part of this story, and they had a deep rift between them. And the day after he died, Susan came into the office and goes, "Oh my gosh, his sister's sitting outside." She came to us because she knew that he was welcome here, that he had a place here. And working with a sister and then working with Pacific View in Newport, who very kindly and generously offered to do his cremation and services for a very small rate, he'll be able to have dignity through the end. He wasn't just part of the indigent being buried in a common grave in Orange County. His name remained, his person remained, and eventually we'll have a service and then we'll put him in the columbarium. So he'll be here at our church. It's very important for you to understand, like, his life wasn't perfect. There were loose ends still. If you knew him, there were still loose ends that he died with, as we all will die with. But what happened was the people of the resurrection met someone and were open to someone who was figuring things out, who was deeply wounded, who was living without dignity, and you gave him communion. This back and forth that Jesus is talking about in the gospel, you did that for him. So this isn't something going, go out and do God's work. I'm telling you, you did God's work, and this is now something that marks our church in a very positive way, in a holy way. That someone could go from living in their car to becoming a brother of ours, and now to rest in our columbarium as a brother and not a stranger, is a testament to what Jesus means when he said to the apostles, "I want you to go and be my witnesses." That this way of reconciliation, this way of restoration is possible. That the world of the cross is not the end. The world of the cross will be redeemed. And it will happen again and again. That's the second story I'll tell you. Susan could probably write a book from people that call the office. But we had someone call from the neighborhood, and they asked me to come save their ex-husband. Literally, that's what they said. We need you. I need you to come and save him before I go out of town. Well, I mean, I'm okay at the job. I'm not that great, to just go save people. But it became clear that what they were looking for is they were looking for spiritual consolation because someone had ALS. And the ALS was progressing in his body, Lou Gehrig's disease. And he doesn't have a spiritual background, and this relative was asking for someone to come and talk to him, to make sense of his suffering, literally as his body's wasting away, to sit and talk to him about how does all this fit into the story of God. So I did. So I went and sat with him. And actually, that's the first question you have to ask when people call on behalf of others. Do they want us to come? You want us to come, but does no, he does, and we'll make sure the dogs are not so you don't get bit. And it's like, oh, that would be nice, thank you. I've been bit several times by dogs in my ministry, but usually not. It's usually later when a person's very sick that the dogs start getting bitey. But I went and sat with him, and I said, how much of the story do you know? He goes, I don't know much of the story at all. So, very much like the book of Acts, we started at the very beginning. What was God's intention? It became like a mini confirmation class. What is the story of this, and then how do you make sense of your suffering? I mean, he's paralyzed now. He stares out the window. He can't move as the disease kind of moves up his body. And so how do you make sense of what you're experiencing? Is this what God wanted, or is this what God came to redeem? This is the space that God is asking you to make your witness in. When I talk about living vulnerably before the world in hope, it means you're willing to be in a situation where you're confronted with another person's suffering that you can't do anything about. You can sit with them, you can commune with them, you can offer your commiseration that they're suffering in the way that they are, people who are living through the confusion of their own illness, for example. But you become a witness to hope, that what it is not what it will finally be. And this is where we find ourselves living with true faith, because it depends on God to do these things. But it's what you did with Don. When we saw him, who he was not who God intended him to be. And so he was able to experience a restoration of hope and dignity until he was on that final road of being fully restored in Christ. And this was the very important part of the ascension. If you'll remember on Easter, when Mary Magdalene, when Mary Magdalene tries to embrace Jesus and he goes, don't hold on to me. Don't hold on to this person. There's going to be something even more than this. This is where we hold the world very lightly, because with the ascension, we are taught that God takes those who are very cast down and he lifts them up. He keeps lifting them up. He keeps exalting them. He keeps raising them higher beyond anything they could experience or imagine. And this is what it means to experience God's glory. The presence of Easter, the presence of this life in places where you least expect it. The presence of hope, the presence of faith, the presence of love. This is the glorifying of the Father's name. It is light. It is the weight of an embrace. It is the experience of love in a desert or in the shadow of death. And this is what the apostles were called to, and this is what the church is called to. And part of what we can say is we can draw a line now in the story of this congregation's history and say you've done it with Don, from beginning to end, literally from beginning to end. And what will God call us to do next? And where will God call us to be sensitive next? You'll notice there was a part of Jesus' prayer, and this is the part that he was answering, and he's answering with us too. It's a very famous phrase that fits into Christian unity, because of course Christians don't have a lot of unity, so this is a prayer the Father's still answering, which is, may they be one as we are one. And in Latin it's called Ut Unum Sint, which is the name of a famous document written about Christian unity. Notice how Jesus united this congregation in a spirit of oneness, around a purpose, around a showing of love and restoring of dignity. Think of what it means for us to be united in heart. We're very different people. Like, I know this, and probably you know this. You come from very different backgrounds, different political beliefs, different economic statuses, different religious experiences, whatever. It's as different as it can be, but Christ unites us around a purpose that we might be one as he and the Father are one. This unity of being witnesses to restoration, witnesses to hope, and witnesses to Easter. So may God bless you for being faithful. May God make us soft-hearted as we look to the future, that in a shared heart of mercy, we might continue to do this work in our world. Amen.